Good morning. I'm Gail McGowan, Director General of the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. Can I begin acknowledging that we meet on Whadjuk country, and I'm appreciating that those around watching the webinar may be meeting on different lands. But could I pay my respects to traditional owners of the land on wherever you're meeting, pay my respects to elders past, present, and acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. Aboriginal culture is a living culture that continues to evolve, but it has its roots in a very distant past. Aboriginal sites are of immense importance. They have cultural, scientific, education and historic interest and provide Aboriginal people with an important link to their present and past culture. As we've seen with recent events, there is national and international interest in our Aboriginal sites, tradition, culture and heritage. The Department works with Aboriginal people to promote their culture and to protect and manage places and objects of significance to Aboriginal heritage. One of the key tasks for the Department is to maintain the Register of Places and Objects under the Aboriginal Heritage Act 1972 and provide access to information on Aboriginal sites through the Aboriginal Heritage Inquiry System that we know as the AHIS. While having information about heritage or heritage sites is important, a significant feature of the Aboriginal Heritage Act is the protection given to all Aboriginal heritage, whether or not it has previously been identified. To ensure that the potential for heritage is properly considered, a due diligence process is recommended, which considers the likelihood of an activity impacting on Aboriginal heritage. The idea is not to assume, but to actually do your due diligence. The Department works with developers and land users to raise awareness and ensure that Aboriginal heritage and engagement with the Aboriginal people are built into planning processes. In situations where impact to a site cannot be avoided, the Department manages processes seeking a Section 18 notice from the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. You'll hear more about the Registrar, due diligence and the operation of the Act in general from James Dobson, one of our team leaders in the Aboriginal Heritage Operations area. James will also talk a little bit about the review of the Act and tell you where you can find further information. The Department's work also supports positive outcomes for Aboriginal heritage and cultural material, with a grants program that can assist projects to protect and preserve registered Aboriginal sites across the state. Our regional officers also engage directly with community and assist in the repatriation of artefacts and human remains that have been removed from their cultural environment. And that's one of the most significant and rewarding aspects of the work our staff do. The way in which the state recognises the connectedness or connection of Aboriginal people with their traditional lands is changing, and new partnerships with Aboriginal people are being formed. The Department's Partnerships and Agreements team is helping to implement native title agreements, including the Southwest Native Title Settlement, the most comprehensive native title agreement negotiated in Australian history. Our final presenter, Glenn Shaw, Acting Manager Heritage Projects, will provide further information on Indigenous Land Use agreements and native title settlements in Western Australia. As you watch this video, please remember that the information we're providing is correct for today, but it may change in the future. To continue our exploration of Aboriginal heritage, I'll hand over to James. Thank you.
Hello, my name's James Dobson from the Department of Planning, Land and Heritage. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the Aboriginal Heritage Act and its implementation and land use, specifically for local government. So this morning, or today, I'm going to be talking about the administration of the Aboriginal Heritage Act of 1972, the registration, the Register and Aboriginal heritage information, key sections of the current Act, Aboriginal sites and heritage places, and statutory applications. The key functions of Aboriginal heritage operations, as I mentioned, are the administration of the Aboriginal Heritage Act of 1972, assisting and supporting the Aboriginal community with the management of Aboriginal sites, providing advice on Aboriginal heritage management and compliance to potential land users, such as local government authorities, and the statutory applications. So first of all, a bit of background about the current legislation. It was an act to make provisions for the preservation on behalf of the community of both places and objects customarily used by or traditional to the original inhabitants of Australia or their descendants, or associated therewith and for other purposes incidental thereto. So not only places but also objects. The key sections of the current legislation are Section 5, which describes the types of Aboriginal heritage places to which the Act applies. Section 15, which states that any person with knowledge of a site is obliged to report that place. Section 17, a person may not excavate, destroy, damage, conceal or alter a site without prior consent under the legislation. Section 18, which is consent to use the land where a site exists. And Section 39, which are functions of the Aboriginal Cultural Materials Committee. So the Aboriginal Cultural Materials Committee, or the ACMC, was formed under Section 28 of the 1972 legislation. It's made up of 3 ex officio members representing the WA Museum, the Land Administration Act, and the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. There's 1 expert in anthropology, and that's specific to the field of Aboriginal heritage. And there are also members who, in the opinion of the Minister, will assist the committee due to having special knowledge, experience or responsibility in relation to cultural heritage matters. And at the moment, that's currently set at 8 Aboriginal people from across the state. The specific functions of the ACMC are to evaluate on behalf of the community the importance of places and objects. They make recommendations to the Minister of those places and objects which are of special significance and should be preserved by the Minister. They determine if there is an Aboriginal site on any land associated with the notice under Section 18 of the Act. They also make recommendations as to whether the Minister should grant consent under Section 18. So when we're talking about Aboriginal culture and heritage, there's quite a broad and wide meaning. So we're looking at beliefs, narratives, what people generally refer to as dreaming, law, ceremonies, and both physical places and objects. Just a reminder that Aboriginal heritage places are protected under the Act even if they are yet to be identified or assessed by the Aboriginal Cultural Materials Committee. Aboriginal cultural heritage does not come in just one form across the state of WA. This map here is quite an old map, and what it does, it doesn't show the fluidity of boundaries of Aboriginal peoples across the state, but what it does indicate is how many different cultural variations can be found across WA. And this map here gives an indication of the Aboriginal heritage places and sites that have currently been reported to DPLH. So the red marks on that map are places that have already been assessed by the ACMC and are places to which the Act applies, so they've gone onto the permanent register. The black markings are lodged heritage places. So they've been identified to the department but have yet to go through the assessment process with the ACMC. But again, those places are still afforded the protection as if they were. The blue markings are what we refer to as stored data or not a site. So these are places that have gone through the assessment process and the ACMC have determined that they are places to which the Act does not apply. As I said before, there's a wide variety of places and objects that we look at in Aboriginal heritage in Western Australia. So we have lots of rivers, we have specific land formations like hilltops, mountains, peaks, mesas. They quite often stand out in the landscape and are important and significant to Aboriginal people. Rocky outcrops, and they're not only located in regional areas of WA, but metropolitan places such as the Swan River also hold extreme importance and significance to Aboriginal people. Here is another example of a heritage place in WA, and this structure in the tree is associated with burial rites. One of the more common types of sites we see across Western Australia are shell middens, so places where people have collected and prepared food over a long period of time. And as you can see in the image here, the build-up of that midden is quite deep, indicating a long and extended period of use. Another form of heritage which is quite evident around WA, and also specifically within the metropolitan regions of WA, is scar trees. So the images we have here are where people have taken layers off the tree to use for things such as shields and bowls for either carrying materials or the production of seed foods. There's also a wide variety of blade types across Western Australia. You can see simple blades, but then also the more serrated ones. And also the ones in the bottom corner of this image are attached to a type of resin which can be made from either a type of mulga tree or also spinifex grass, and it's used as a glue for attaching blades to spear shafts or to axes or adze. So here we have some other common forms of Aboriginal heritage which are found across the state. So the big flat rock there is a grinding base, and the smooth round rock is the handheld piece, generally used for grinding seed for the production of food. Also can be used for the grinding of ochre for the production of paint. It's used in a way that is similar to the way that pestle and mortars are used commonly today for the preparation of herbs and spices. Here we have another well-known form of Aboriginal heritage across Australia, but especially here in Western Australia, is rock and cave paintings, carvings and etchings. So the hand stencils there are quite well known. But the middle top photo there, you can see what looks like somebody holding a firearm shooting something. That there can be a painting that has been produced post-colonisation with the introduction of firearms to Aboriginal people. And here again are some more examples of post-colonisation heritage for Aboriginal people. So we have a blade there that's, rather than being created from rock and stone, has actually been created from glass that has been found. Also, there's what a lot of people see today as parklands can often have great historical value as camping places, living places, but also, unfortunately, massacre sites. What we have here, you can see the ring of stone. This here is a fish trap, which again is common across the length of the Western Australian coast, but especially down south around the Albany area. So people would create these rings of stone. The tides, as they would come in, would bring fish stocks with them, and as the tides would go back out, those fish would be trapped within that circle, and so therefore they'd be easy to capture. Here you can see a rock cave or shelter, as well as some red pigment in the second photo. So a lot of rock shelters here is where materials such as ochre are found and produced and can be used both for painting in those caves, but also the use of body painting for ceremonial purposes. So when we're looking at all those places that are of importance and significance to Aboriginal people, to end up on the permanent register of objects and places, they need to fit in with one of the 4 subsections of Section 5 of the Aboriginal Heritage Act. So 5A is any place of importance and significance where persons of Aboriginal descent have or appear to have left any object, natural or artificial, used for or made or adapted for use for any purpose connected with the traditional cultural life of the Aboriginal people, past or present. So we've just been looking at cave paintings, we've been looking at grinding stones, spearheads. These are all things that the places where they've been found could potentially fit under 5A. 5B is any sacred ritual or ceremonial site. So these could be initiation places, dance grounds, they could be places of burial, but also places such as rivers that have connection to creation ancestors. 5C is any place which, in the opinion of the committee, is or was associated with the Aboriginal people and which is of historical, anthropological, archaeological or ethnographic interest and should be preserved because of its importance and significance to the cultural heritage of the state. So these are places that not only tell the Aboriginal story, but the story of the state of Western Australia. So places that we have under 5C, we have places where there's been recorded massacres, places where Aboriginal people have lived and camped in the post-colonial days. So those places that help tell the story of Western Australia. 5D is any place where objects which this Act applies are traditionally stored. So these can be niches that are in rock shelters, caves, places more commonly created today as keeping places, storage areas. So it's not just places from a long time ago. They can be more modern created places, but still have that same purpose of storing and looking after places, objects, to which this Act applies. In Aboriginal heritage operations here, as I mentioned before, we look after the statutory approvals under the Aboriginal Heritage Act. And there are a couple of different forms which they take. So the first one is Section 16 of the Act, and that is approval to excavate an Aboriginal site. So approval to remove something from that place. And this is usually issued for the purpose of research. So where people are looking to try and establish a date for the use and occupation of, say, a cave, to remove items that can be dated, under the Aboriginal Heritage Act, you would need approval, and that would come under the form of Section 16. The more well-known form is Section 18, and that's consent to use the land where an Aboriginal site exists. So that's where a land user has done their due diligence, looked at all their planning, and it's been determined that to implement their proposal, they cannot avoid impacting a site. They must seek consent from the Minister under Section 18. So what is that Section 18, and when is one required? Well, if an activity is to damage an Aboriginal site, Section 18 consent is required, and those activities can include mining pits, new access tracks, steel piles into a river, drilling, those sorts of activities, and the development of local infrastructure, paths and roads. But not all activities require consent, and it depends on the consultation process with the traditional owners, the level of impact, and if the area has been previously disturbed. Many stakeholders contact heritage operations for advice on what approvals are required. That's a service that we provide every day to help manage and look after those Aboriginal heritage places. Only the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs can grant consent to disturb an Aboriginal site, and therefore the proponent cannot be prosecuted if granted consent. Now, the process for this, for seeking Section 18 consent, is first of all, we recommend that due diligence guidelines are used because they can assist land users to be more aware of how their activities could adversely impact an Aboriginal site. Compliance with these guidelines will not of itself guarantee compliance with the Aboriginal Heritage Act. However, where the guidelines are followed, it is less likely that Aboriginal sites will be harmed. Site surveys and consultation with traditional owners and knowledge holders may be required if further information is needed to be recorded. The proponent will then submit an application to disturb an Aboriginal site to the Department for processing. So once it's been determined that impact is unavoidable, only then should an application be submitted. The Department will then undertake an assessment of that application. The application goes to the Aboriginal Cultural Materials Committee, who make a recommendation to the Minister on whether he should grant consent or not, and with what conditions. The ACMC also resolve as to whether an Aboriginal site exists on the land. And the Minister will then either agree or disagree with the ACMC's recommendations and provide consent or decline that consent. People can also seek consent or approval under the Aboriginal Heritage Regulations of 1974. This varies slightly from the Section 18 consent. When activities such as digging a hole or to alter vegetation are within a registered site but deemed minor impact, a Regulation 10 under the AHR may be issued. There's no legal indemnity against the AHA, and the consent is signed by the registrar rather than the minister. Application is made in writing to the registrar, and it usually requires a statement from the rep body and/or people with the heritage knowledge of the site outlining their views and support. So the register will be seeking to develop an understanding of what the traditional owners believe will be the impact from that activity to help determine whether it's going to be a minor impact or a much larger impact. These are commonly used for emergency works and revegetation, restoration activities including fencing and tree planting. So as I've said so far, all these practices have come under the Aboriginal Heritage Act of 1972, which was the first specific piece of legislation in Australia written for and managing Aboriginal heritage. But in 2018, the Minister announced a review of the existing Aboriginal heritage legislation, and during the 2018 Phase 1 statewide consultation, the Department received feedback on issues with the Aboriginal Heritage Act of 1972 and suggestions on what modernising Aboriginal heritage legislation should look like. Feedback from Phase 1 was incorporated into key themes that were included in a discussion paper that was the basis of the Phase 2 consultation that was completed in 2019, for which there was broad support for themes that would be a key to the proposed legislation. The key themes for the discussion paper were included in the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill 2020, which was drafted in 2020 and subject of Phase 3 consultation in September and October of 2020. The intention remains that this bill will be introduced after the March 2021 election and following the appointment of a new minister. Future consultation will occur regarding regulations, the ACH Management Code and other guideline and policy documents that are being developed to support the bill. More information is available on the bill on the Department's webpage and includes an address by the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, a departmental presentation outlining each part of the bill, the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill of 2020, and an overview document explaining the bill. So if you're seeking further advice, we've got some contacts here. So if you're looking for advice or inquiries about Aboriginal heritage, about when Section 18 might be required, please send those inquiries through Aboriginal Heritage at dplh.wa.gov.au. The due diligence guidelines will help you to look at how your proposal may impact heritage is also available at the link there on the Department's website. And also, if you're looking to find further information on the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill 2020 and all its associated information, it's also available at the link on the Department website. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging we are on Noongar Budja, Wodjuk Noongar Budja, and recognise and pay my respects to Noongar elders past, present and those emerging. My name is Glenn Shaw, I'm the Acting Manager for Heritage Projects, and I'll be stepping through some information on native title settlements and Indigenous Land Use Agreements for you. So the overview is Indigenous Land Use Agreements, the South West Native Title Settlement and the Noongar Heritage Agreement for Local Government and the new Yamatji Nation Land Use Agreement. Firstly, what's an Indigenous Land Use Agreement? Well, it's an agreement between native title holders and others. Often it's the state or it's a industry body. And there are a few rules and regulations on what they must contain, and they must be consistent with the Native Title Act. They always resolve native title issues, quite often resolve issues such as access and or activities on country. And more often than not, they provide a group of benefits or some benefits to the native title holders as part and parcel of the agreement. In essence, they're designed to once those native title issues are resolved, it's to provide other parties access to land and or waters within the area of the Indigenous Land Use Agreement. So here we have the maps of the two land use agreements we'll be looking at today. On the left you have the Yamatji Nation's Indigenous Land Use Agreement. And on the right you have the Southwest Native Title Settlement, which contains the 6 Indigenous Land Use Agreements. And starting from the top you have the Yuwid, Wadjuk, Balladong, Ngalakala Budja, Southwest Budjarra and Waggalkype in Southern Noongar. So the Southwest Native Title Settlement is an agreement between the state and the Noongar Native Title groups. It resolves all native title claims through and the surrender of native title rights and interests across the area. And there is a fairly comprehensive package of benefits, which includes such things as 320,000 hectares of land, with 300,000 being reserve land and 20,000 being freehold. There are a number of other social programs. There is the community development program, there's an economic development, there is the land access, there's access to water catchment areas, there's a Noongar Standard Heritage Agreement, Noongar Heritage Partnership Agreement, and funds that are delivered into the Noongar Budja Trust, which is a trust which is held in perpetuity for the Noongar community. As part of the idea of the Native Title Act will no longer apply across the entirety of the Southwest. So there'll be no more future Act regimes, there'll be no more statutory requirements under the Native Title Act which apply. Now the aims of the settlement are cultural, social and economic development and certainty over land management. Now it's certainty for both sides. It's certainty for the Noongar community in relation to lands that will be held in trust for them, but it's also certainty to the individual landholders, local governments, leaseholders and the state government. Now there are 6 identical ILUAs, minor difference across a couple, but it's only one paragraph, so it's probably not worth raising at this point. But in essence, the details of the 6 agreements are pretty much the same. Now there is within all of the Southwest Settlement a Noongar Standard Heritage Agreement. Unfortunately, that was inconsistent with the procurement processes of local government, so therefore it couldn't be used for local government. There were some discussions between the WA Local Government Association, WALGA, and the Southwest Aboriginal Land and Sea Council, with DPLH providing some advice, and a template agreement has been developed, which is a Noongar Heritage Agreement for local government. And that allows local government to enter into the formal process, which is comparative to the NSHA, but ensures a consistency with the local government bylaws. So it covers the Southwest, it's tailored for the local government procurement processes, it identifies the obligations, it sets up a uniform and efficient approach for heritage surveys. The Noongar Heritage Agreement for local government provides a slightly different number of informants, where the NSHA says there must be 8 informants. The Noongar Heritage Agreement for local government says it's up to 6. The process for the provision of information is the same as with the Noongar Standard Heritage Agreement. At the moment, it must be said that Swalski's having issues in servicing the Noongar Heritage Agreement for local government. So they've recommended that local governments contact the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage directly and seek advice on names of informants, which we can provide to the local government and or their heritage service provider they've engaged. That service provider will assist in collating the survey team, undertaking the survey for you, preparing a report and delivering it to the department. As part and parcel of the Noongar Heritage Agreement for local government, when assessing as to whether not only a heritage agreement is required, but also whether an activity notice is required, you should undertake a due diligence assessment. Now that looks at whether the activity will potentially impact any Aboriginal heritage site. So it goes to the ground disturbing activity. You can do that to a degree by searching the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage Aboriginal Heritage Inquiry System and identify if there are any sites in the area. You can also see if there have been previous surveys in the area. There may have been a survey recently done by a completely different body but for a similar purpose, and that survey may be of use to you rather than having a new survey yourself. If in doubt, contact the department and we can provide you with the advice. As part of your assessment, you need to look at, has the landscape already been altered, and if so, to what degree? And you match that with the potential impact of the landscape, and you use a matrix contained in the due diligence guidelines, and that will give you an indication as to whether impact is likely and whether a survey is required. Again, if doubt, contact the department and we can provide you with some advice and some direction. There are a number of contacts. We have the Noongar Standard Heritage Agreement contacts, which is myself. There's Jeremy Elder, who's the Director of Partnerships and Agreements. There are also the Department of Premier and Cabinet's Aboriginal Engagement. So if you have broader questions in relation to native title itself, then it's preferred that you contact Department of Premier and Cabinet because they have the relevant expertise. If you're looking to make contact in relation to the Southwest Native Title Settlement Heritage, there is a website there. There is a separate one for Yamatji Nation. Now both Jeremy and I access those, and as additional staff come on board to service those two agreements, they'll be accessing those as well. So you won't be reliant on a single person opening the email inbox. It'll be spread across 3 or 4 of us. So hopefully we can return your email as quickly as possible. Thank you. You may also want a copy of the full presentation, seeing we have the condensed one here. A PDF can be provided to you. That will provide all of the slides, all of the contact details, including links to resource documents such as the due diligence guidelines, the Aboriginal Heritage Inquiry System, and all of the departmental contacts.